1. After my older sister caused my death, my ex-boyfriend married her and had a daughter, naming her after me. They brought my parents to my grave, asking for my forgiveness for my sister's wrongdoings. Seriously, who are they trying to disgust here? I laughed sarcastically from above. And then I was reborn. I was reborn at the New Year's Eve dinner of the green and white families. I looked at the half glass of orange juice in my hand, and a familiar voice pulled me out of my daze. It's New Year's, don't look so sullen. Look at all these dishes. Do you really have to fight your sister over that abalone? I looked up and saw my mom's displeased face as memories came flooding back. Everyone gets one. I'm just eating my own. How is that stealing from her? I stared down at my plate and saw that Jack had swiftly taken my abalone and placed it in front of Alice. Right. I've always had to let my sister have everything because of her congenital heart condition. Anything she wanted, I had to give up. Anything fun or tasty was reserved for her. If she didn't want it, I couldn't even smell it. And every time, my sister would blink those innocent eyes at me, apologizing like some pure innocent flower. Over time, I learned to keep quiet and give in. Experience taught me that protesting was useless. I glanced around at everyone else. My mom and dad looked at me disapprovingly. Jack seemed like he wanted to say something. My dad frowned, and his gaze was full of reproach. Everyone loved the understanding Alice. At this moment, Jack and I had already broken up. Jack finally realized his feelings and confessed to Alice, though she hadn't accepted because she was considering my feelings. I didn't want to be at this dinner, but my parents urged me to be sensible, so I reluctantly came. It must have been Jane who ate it, Alice said, trying to hand the plate back to me. But Mrs. White stopped her with a peaceful expression. Jane, Jack is hosting us today, so it's his decision who eats what, right? Every year, the green and white families have a New Year's Eve dinner, taking turns to host. The smile on Alice's face disappeared, replaced by an awkward expression. Mrs. White patted her hand for comfort. My mom, looking impatient, said, enough. If you really want abalone, pay for another serving yourself. My dad tugged at her sleeve. All right, she knows she was wrong. He turned to me, Jane, you're an adult now. You should be more sensible. Mr. White tried to smooth things over, giving me a helping of mushrooms and greens. It's New Year's, let's all be happy. Try these mushrooms, they're good. I smiled and nodded. Thank you, Mr. White. I didn't like greens, and neither did Alice, but my parents loved them. To them, my preferences didn't matter. Anything Alice didn't eat, I'd have to finish. After throwing up violently at the table once, they finally stopped forcing me to eat what I didn't like. Mrs. White, trying to be fair, gave me another helping. Jane, I might have been harsh earlier. Don't be mad. But I have to tell you, you're grown up now. You can't be so willful. I smiled and nodded again, subtly checking my watch. I had an hour and a half left of this dinner. Last time, I stayed miserably until the end, only to find that everyone's phones broke, and I ended up paying the bill. Not falling for that one again. I endured until the server knocked on the door. I seized the opportunity to leave by saying I needed the restroom. No one seemed to suspect anything except Alice, who showed concern for me. I smiled, said I'd just be a minute and left. I only brought my phone, so leaving was easy. I headed straight to the restaurant entrance, where the car I called was waiting. Once in the car, I blocked all of their contacts. Let Mrs. White's precious son handle it. After all, he was hosting. When I reached my parents' neighborhood, I asked the driver to wait and went straight to the study. I rummaged around until I found the household register and then headed back to my apartment. I'm grateful that I had some sense last time. After my parents turned my room into Alice's study, I went and rented my place. I still remember how cold and shaky I felt seeing all my stuff thrown into a tiny room. I argued so many times but always lost because, to them, anything was worth my sacrifice if it meant Alice was happy. I opened a real estate website and messaged about the house I remembered from my past. I'd found it much earlier this time. I shouldn't lose it now. On the day I went to view the house, I got there on time to meet the owner and the agent. The agent arrived early and told me the owner would be a bit late. This agent really wanted to close the deal and kept going on about the house's perks. I wanted to decide quickly too, but acted indifferent for bargaining. Sorry for being late. Are you Miss Jane? Said a familiar, pleasant voice. I adjusted my smile and turned around, only for it to freeze. Why did the owner look so much like my current boss, Frank? And I called in sick today, too. The agent saw that Frank and I knew each other, and got more enthusiastic, probably hoping to close the deal. I awkwardly greeted Frank, thinking I might sign the contract today and be jobless tomorrow. But after seeing the place, I felt it was perfect. So I showed interest in buying, even with Frank's friendly smile making me feel uneasy. To my surprise, Frank offered a 10% discount on the original price. That was a pleasant shock, and I signed the contract right away, forgetting my nerves. After the agent left, I quickly apologized to Frank. Sorry, boss, I didn't mean to skip work. It's just that your place is so nice and the price is right, I was worried. Frank smiled gently. No worries, I skipped work too. I couldn't help but think, you're a big boss. Can you really be like us regular folks? Oh, by the way, Miss Jane, it's lunchtime. Want to grab something to eat together? Honestly, I wasn't thrilled about hanging out with my boss after hours, but I couldn't say no. I plastered on a smile and agreed. Sure, boss. Just call me Jane. All right, and you can call me Frank when we're off the clock. I hesitated a bit. Frank smiled again. Hearing boss all the time makes me feel like I'm working 24/7, and that's not good for me. I reluctantly agreed to his request. I thought since Frank gave me such a discount, I'd treat him to lunch. But when I saw he took me to a fancy restaurant with great reviews, I silently kept my wallet closed. Over lunch, curiosity got the better of me. Why the 10% discount? I couldn't quite call him by his first name. Because you were straightforward, Frank said while pouring tea. I rarely handle real estate deals myself. I did once and it left a bad taste. Turns out he has more assets than I thought. Feel relieved now? Frank smiled, placing some signature dish on my plate. After the meal, he offered me a ride, but I wanted to politely decline. Just then, I heard familiar voices at the entrance. Jane, Jane. Hearing those voices made me frown. I didn't plan on hiding from them forever, but running into Jack and Alice so soon was frustrating. Alice walked up quickly and grabbed my hand. Jane, do you know how worried we were? You cut us off, and we couldn't reach you at all. Alice glanced at Frank. Even if the elders said something that day, you shouldn't have left without a word. Was it really necessary to throw a fit just because you missed one dish? You weren't like this before. A few service staff glanced our way. Jack quickly hushed himself. As a famous pianist with a big following, he usually went incognito to avoid being recognized, even dining in quieter spots. He whispered to me, "Follow us to a private room." I felt a bit sad about how much I'd pandered to him before, thinking he could summon me anytime. I ignored him and said to Frank, "Boss, let's go." Frank nodded, paused, and followed me. Unexpectedly, Jack and Alice decided to skip their meal and followed us to a nearby underground parking lot. With fewer people around, Jack got bolder and grabbed my hand. I frowned and said loudly, "What do you want?" Jack stayed silent. "I want to take you to see your parents." Alice blocked Frank as he tried to step in. "You're Jane's boss. Please, this is between us and her. If it's between you guys and her, she should have a say in whether I can step in," Frank said, moving past Alice towards me. Jack held tight. I warned him, "Jack, aren't you a pianist? If you don't want to play anymore, I can help." I raised my phone, aiming it at his hand that held me. Jack feared his hands getting hurt. His expression turned anxious, and he reluctantly let go, looking at me in disbelief. He seemed shocked, especially since during our relationship, I cared more for his hands than he did. If they had even a tiny bruise, I'd get nervous. Now I realize how foolish I'd been. I wanted to leave quickly, so I turned to Frank. "Could you give me a ride home, mister? Frank." Frank chuckled. "I'm only in my early 30s, not that old. Follow me." Feeling embarrassed, I quickly kept up. Alice grabbed me. "Jane, don't do this. Do you know what happened after you left that day? You guys didn't settle the bill, right?" Alice continued, "There was an incident. Jack and I couldn't use our phones, and our parents didn't know how to use mobile payments." I laughed. "That's not my problem. I hardly ate anything that day. Shouldn't it be you settling the bill?" Alice mumbled, my phone was dead. Jane. Frank had already opened a Bentley's door. Get in. All right. I cheerfully responded, opening the passenger side and hopping in. Frank turned the ignition, maneuvering towards the exit. In the rearview mirror, I saw the two trying to catch up. But Alice suddenly clutched her chest and bent over, with Jack quickly holding her. Was that a heart attack? I wasn't sure. I doubted that little scene could really affect her. Frank dropped me off at my neighborhood entrance. Thanks. Sorry for the hassle today. Don't worry about it. Everyone has their share of complicated situations. I unbuckled my seatbelt, reaching for the door handle to get out. 3. Hold on a sec. I was a bit surprised but stopped as instructed. Actually, I wanted to ask for your help. I planned to call you tonight, but who knew you'd be the buyer of the house? What a coincidence. I knew this perk wouldn't come easy. There had to be a catch waiting for me. But since I benefited from it, I might as well listen to what he has to say. Turns out he wants me to work overtime. I wasn't thrilled, but I did skip out on work earlier. Plus, he was nice about it and offered good overtime benefits, so I agreed. He also mentioned that the previous assistant resigned, and there's an opening for me. That made me even happier. Focusing on my career is what really matters. No love. Then eat more bread. After transferring the house, I planned to take some time to move my household registration. Frank immediately approved half a day off and told me to be safe on the road. With such a considerate boss, I couldn't help but feel deeply thankful. As I neared the police station, I got a call from an unknown number. I hadn't been bothered by those two since that day, which made me lower my guard. So when I heard my dad's voice on the phone, I was startled. But he just calmly invited me for a family dinner on Saturday night, saying families don't hold grudges overnight. I realized they wanted me to be the scapegoat again. In my previous life, my dad lent his car to a friend for an errand. That friend was unreliable, and I advised against lending the car. But Dad couldn't say no to an old friend, and Mom scolded me for meddling in adult affairs. Alice chimed in, saying parents know best, and Mom praised her for her sensibility. Not long after, the friend got in a drunk driving accident and fled the scene. According to the rules, Dad wasn't liable. But the friend's license had expired, and he couldn't compensate, leaving Dad to front tens of thousands. My parents were doing okay financially. They had about $100,000 in savings, and some company shares and properties. But they were planning to buy a house for Alice's wedding, and had their eye on one. Compensating the victim would delay the house purchase. So they set their sights on my savings. Over the years, they knew how to manipulate me with family ties. We raised you this much, and now you're a thankless wretch for not lending us money in this emergency. Jane, this house is really nice. It'd be a shame to miss it. I was wrong not to listen to you before. But won't you help Dad this time? I looked at Alice's smug eyes and stubbornly refused. Alice, sensing the opportunity, said it's not like I need to buy a house right now. I might not even marry in the next 2 years, especially given my health. Do my parents remember I'm only 2 years younger than Alice? Don't overthink it. Jack is a good kid, he won't mind. Mom paused, realizing Jack was my ex. Anyway, it's not your concern. She then patiently told me, we know you always thought we favored your sister, but given her health, it's normal to worry more about her. We love both of you just the same. I longed for that elusive family love, and ended up handing over years of hard-earned savings, due to parental persuasion and Alice's act. The past is unbearable to remember. I didn't want any more contact, but to make things clear, I agreed to dinner with Dad. They booked the place where we had last year's New Year's Eve dinner. When I got there, the 3 of them were already waiting. Seeing me arrive, Mom rang the bell for the server and joked at me. This time we ordered all the delicacies for you to eat to your heart's content. She still thought I cut ties over a mere dish. Alice wore a peaceful expression, as if nothing had happened, and asked about Frank, wondering if he was my boyfriend. Dad was surprised. You have a boyfriend? No, I said slowly, he's my boss. Didn't I call him that in front of Alice? Alice smiled gently and said, well, your boss seems nice. That restaurant isn't cheap. It's a stretch with your salary. Exactly, I nodded. I've always been broke. I just bought a house recently, so my entire savings are gone. What? I was pleased to see their shock written all over their faces. After the shock wore off, my parents looked at me with a mix of dissatisfaction and blame. Alice didn't say much. She knew leaving it to the parents was enough. She kept comforting them, suggesting I might have my reasons. Mom said irately, "Your sister's defending you, and yet you're still so clueless." The food arrived, and I just took a sip of water. "You always said the family money was for Alice, and I should fend for myself. So I made my own decision," I said. Dad looked disappointed. "Why divide things so strictly in a family? I admit we favored your sister materially, but we love you both equally." Perhaps partial parents find comfort and self-deception in such things. Say it often enough, and they even believe it. "So how much money do you have now?" Mom knew the emotional tactic wouldn't work and asked directly. "None left," I said calmly, "just a couple thousand for living expenses." I lied. After the down payment, I still had a few grand saved for emergencies. Mom held back her anger. "A couple thousand? You should have saved more. What if you need money? We can't help." I smiled. "For what kind of situation?" Mom fell silent. Alice glanced at my parents and suggested, "Maybe Jane should know. She's part of the family." Dad sighed heavily and started complaining. It was the same as in the past life. His friend borrowed the car, got into an accident, and now couldn't pay. Dad sighed and said the victims threatened to make trouble at his school unless compensated. After speaking, he looked at me expectantly with a troubled expression. "Why are you looking at me? I have no money." I sighed along with them. Dad still had some pride and couldn't bring himself to ask me directly, so he hesitated. Alice, who had been eating quietly, decided it was time to act as the caring daughter and asked me to come up with a solution. I chuckled. "Can't we just use the family savings for now?" When Mom raised her eyebrows, ready to speak, Dad signaled her to stop. Seeing this, Alice blamed herself. "It's all my fault. Mom and Dad said they were going to buy me a house for when I get married. But honestly, who knows if I'll ever get married? Maybe you shouldn't buy it after all." Mom, feeling sorry for Jane, hugged her tightly. "Don't say that, sweetheart. We definitely have to get that house. Where else could we find such a great place at such a low price?" I shrugged. "There's nothing I can do." "Jane, I know this is tough," Alice lowered her voice, "but can you try to borrow some money from your coworkers or friends? You know, with Mom and Dad's age and status, asking for money everywhere. College professors and company executives can't borrow money, huh?" I scoffed. "The people I know are at the same level, who can just pull out hundreds of thousands of dollars." All three of us fell silent. It's not like they suddenly developed a conscience, or were being more understanding. They knew what I said was true. They couldn't guilt-trip that kind of money out of me. But Alice wasn't going to give up her antics so easily. "Jane, could you maybe ask your boss for a loan?" I answered bluntly no. "What did you say?" Mom was visibly upset. I smirked sarcastically. "What am I supposed to do? Borrow money from my boss? Pay them back how? What happens to my mortgage? Who said you had to move out? You rent out the new house, come back home, and live with us. Then just work hard to pay back your boss. Why would I, in my right mind, leave a spacious house to live back in a storeroom?" I stood up. "Maybe it's best if we stop communicating altogether." The trio looked shocked again, probably not expecting the usually meek and obedient me to really refuse to tolerate it any longer. Even Dad, who was somewhat nice to me, looked different after hearing what I said. "You want to cut ties with us? Don't forget, the law says you still have to support us." He softened a bit. "Why hold grudges between family? Just apologize to your mom, and you'll still be our good daughter." I waved my hand and started towards the door. "You already have a good daughter in Alice. As for supporting you, I'll follow the law. Once you're 60, sue me. Whatever the court decides, I'll pay." "Jane, what's up?" With a smile, I pointed out, "I haven't touched a single dish on this table. You wouldn't make me pay, would you? Get out. From now on, we'll pretend we don't have a daughter like you." Mom shouted. "Sounds good to me." I thought Mom would be true to her word, but less than 2 hours later, I got a text from her new number. Alice said she'd borrow money from Jack. "If you ever want to come back to this family, you'll have to repay it." Oops, I forgot to block that number earlier. I didn't reply right away. After a while, I unblocked Mom and messaged, I have some questions about the loan. Mom replied coldly with 4 words, what questions? I saw her reply, immediately started screen recording and recording audio, then replied, Mom, if Dad's friend borrows his car and crashes it, shouldn't it be on him or his friend to pay, not me? Mom quickly responded, what do you mean by that? Whether you like it or not, you're responsible for this money. She sent a voice message, don't even think about bothering Jack to repay it. You'll repay through me and your dad. You and Jack are over, he likes your sister. Be mature. Don't cause trouble for them. After a series of messages scolding me for being less considerate than Alice, I blocked her again. I turned on the TV, just as they were broadcasting an interview with Jack. The reporter asked him, you've got a lot of fans curious about your personal life. What type of girl do you like? Jack smiled. Actually, there's one girl I've had a crush on for years. After this tour, I'm planning to confess to her. With Jack's nearly million fan following, this was big news. The reporter looked surprised. You've never had a girlfriend? Jack paused and said no. So I guess I was dating a dog all this time? But honestly, I felt calm. Everything Jack said didn't sting like before. Breaking up with him felt like a distant memory. The reporter smiled. Well, I hope your tour and love confession go well. I silently wished Alice and Jack an eternity together. Jack's confession exploded online. Jack confesses Jack's crush, Jack's childhood sweetheart. These topics were trending for days. I closed the browser, avoiding the junk, and started watching a movie. The buzz held until it tapered off on Monday. After work that day, I saw Alice waiting pathetically outside my office. Jane, can we talk? Just for a moment. If you're not up to it, just refuse. Frank's voice came from behind. He approached me looking concerned. Need help? I'm okay, I can handle it. Alice wasn't someone who'd spook me. Frank said, call me if you need anything. Or call the cops. I chuckled. Got it. Thanks. Using his name felt too daring, but being too formal might be unfriendly. I mumbled something in between. Alice scoffed. Mr. Frank, you're exaggerating. I'm Jane's sister. I wouldn't harm her. Frank ignored her, walking straight to his car. Alice shifted nervously and said, Jane, can we discuss this somewhere quieter? To avoid a scene, I agreed, taking her to the cafe across the street. Once we sat, Alice urgently said, Jane, I had no idea Jack would say that on TV. I discreetly started the recording app on my phone. Alice added, Jane, if you don't want me to be with him, I won't. 5. Here we go again. Did anyone else know you came to see me? No. I was in a hurry to see you, so I haven't told anyone yet. All right then, I'll tell you straight up. I honestly don't care about your thing with Jack. Whether you two are together or not is none of my business. I got up to leave, but Alice grabbed my hand again. I was kind of scared she might suddenly fall or something, and then I'd really have no way to explain it. Old trick, but it does the job. Jane, I'm going to turn Jack down. Please don't distance yourself from us, okay? Mom and Dad miss you. Alice. I looked up and saw my mom. These days, I prefer calling her Ms. Judy. Ms. Judy rushed over to Alice's side, glaring at me. Jane, are you ignoring me or what? I told you not to bother Alice. Alice conveniently couldn't form a full sentence at this point, and started gasping. Mom, it's not Jane, it's me. I was speechless, so I explained. It was your daughter who asked me out, and now she's the one holding my hand. Your sister is in such a state, and you're still arguing. Ms. Judy was furious and reached out to slap me. Alice was holding my hand, so I couldn't dodge. I turned my head, and in the chaos, my other hand pushed Ms. Judy slightly. Her hand missed me, and ended up slapping Alice. Alice's head jerked to the side, and she naturally let go of my hand. I took the chance to break free, ignored Ms. Judy's shouts, and ran out of the shop. Just as I was about to call a cab on the street, a Bentley stopped right in front of me. Get in. Frank leaned out the window, smiling at me. I felt awkward getting into my boss's car, but seeing Ms. Judy and Alice coming after me. Before I knew it, I was in the passenger seat. After the car started, and we'd driven a bit, I started wondering, did it really take him that long to get the car? Was he waiting for me the whole time? Soon, we were back at the entrance of my new apartment complex. I had already moved in a few days ago, since Frank had sold the place with all the furniture included. See you tomorrow, Assistant Jane. I nodded, then realized he called me Assistant Jane. I paused, thinking it must mean I got promoted. He saw my reaction and smiled slightly. Seems like you're getting used to the title. I felt a bit shy for a moment and jokingly said, Boss, a promotion should come with a raise. Or I'd double it. I loved the sound of that, and we chatted a bit more. Frank seemed genuinely interested in being friends. But why though? I might have been too forward, making you uncomfortable. I apologize and hope you don't mind. Since he was being so open, I had no choice but to drop my guard. I didn't want this to affect my work. Boss, I appreciate the gesture, but until my questions are answered, I feel it's best to keep calling you boss. I meant it sincerely. Frank calmly asked, You wonder why I want to be friends with you? Boss, you don't seem like someone lacking friends. And I definitely don't flatter myself thinking you like me. Without a real answer, I'd always feel uneasy. After all, he's the founder of a soon-to-be skyscraper-owning company. Friendship requires some common ground, right? Silence fell over us. Frank sighed lightly and said, Half a year ago, I passed by the garden complex. I saw you, having an argument with your mom and sister. I instantly knew what he was talking about. It was right after my breakup with Jack. Growing up neglected and craving love, I fell for Jack when he wanted to be with me. I was happy then, even able to brush off my parents' favoritism toward Alice. Then, Jack said he realized he was in love with Alice, treating me more like a sister, and he couldn't lie anymore. I can't recall my exact emotions that day, just that I was furious, ready to confront and hit Alice. Alice claimed she had no idea, and my parents defended her. Mom even scolded me, calling Alice and Jack a perfect match, while I was the third wheel. I couldn't take it and ran out, with Alice chasing after, crying and promising she'd never be with Jack. Maybe I was too shaken up. My mom, unusually kind, said a few soothing words, blaming Jack and asking me not to hold it against Alice. I bought into Alice's innocence and Mom's softened stance, swallowing my pain. I never expected Alice to stick to the habit of taking my things, or for Mom to be so supportive of Jack and Alice together if Jack was at fault. Did you decide to be friends because of what you saw? I was puzzled. I have a distant cousin. Her family's all about the brother, neglecting her. She couldn't even get a student loan despite her family's wealth. While taking care of her sister's tuition, she worked herself to exhaustion, and, well, there was an accident. It was an accident. I murmured, empathizing. She was fiercely independent and didn't want to ask for help. Feeling our families weren't close enough, Frank said, a touch of sadness in his voice. Is he projecting? Feeling awkward, I said, I'm grown now and working. I can take care of myself. I know. Usually I can't just disturb someone over something like this. On the day we were buying the house, I thought calling you by name might help you relax, since you looked nervous. Well, it only made you more nervous. After dinner, I saw your sister and that must have been your ex, right? Seeing how you interacted, plus you taking time off work to finalize the house, I figured things with your family weren't smoothed over. So, I helped you twice, but it seems that just added more stress on you. Thinking about it, Frank really hasn't interfered in my personal life. Maybe he helped just to be nice. So maybe I was overthinking things. I felt even more awkward. But hey, it's not like we have nothing in common. I got curious. Boss, what are you referring to? Like, I think your sister is no angel. More like a queen of manipulation. You must think the same, right? Haha, I couldn't help but laugh. What if I'm actually the one in the wrong? Frank said calmly. I'd still trust my instincts. He looked at me and added, if you're not comfortable yet, you can address me however you like. If you need help with anything, just come to me. I just want my team to work without being bothered by personal issues. I could feel he genuinely meant it, so I replied, thanks, boss. I'll do that. Great, by the way, are you free on Sunday? Huh, another Sunday work session? No plans yet. But the boss is nice, so why not? Frank told me his plan, and I was a bit surprised. Then he said, it'd be really helpful, Jane. No problem, though I'm not very experienced. That's okay, she's pretty easygoing. This was a unique work thing, so I started preparing after I got home. During a break, I saw a text from Jack on a new number telling me to apologize to Alice, and that I didn't need to pay them back. I was amused at their pettiness, often using new numbers just to bug me. Since I can't whitelist numbers because of work, I decided to mute such calls. Then, I sent a cafe recording to Jack's WeChat, reminding him that I shouldn't have to pay and telling him to stop barking. Next thing I know, I got added to a chat group called Family. A stranger in the group tagged me saying, "Jane, your mom's told me everything. Being filial is most important. How could you treat your parents this way? Listen to your uncle and apologize." Uncle. So the family from my past life who indirectly messed up my leg is showing up again, huh? Last time, this same uncle and his family visited my parents and lectured me. His brat Brain was always rude to me but obedient to Alice. Whenever Brain came over, he'd cling to Alice to play. But when Jack invited Alice out, Uncle Fong and Judy wanted me to babysit Brain. Brain, though, was super resistant and started hitting me. Fong only half-heartedly scolded the kid, then blamed me instead, asking why his kid disliked me but liked my sister. Dragging along 2/3 wheels, Alice wasn't too pleased but didn't refuse. Once we reached a mall, things went sideways. Brain was hyper and bumped into a clerk. Jack tried grabbing him but lost his balance, nearly tumbling down the escalator. Being in love back then, I rushed to push them back, ending up tumbling myself and getting my leg crushed by a falling sign. I ended up with a severe leg fracture, and though it healed somewhat, I could only do mild exercises afterward. Jack felt guilty and suggested we reconcile, promising to be responsible. I was overjoyed and got back with him. Seeing this, Judy urged me to break up, claiming my leg was fine as long as I walked slowly, and that using Jack felt forced. To cut off feelings for Alice, Jack proposed soon after I left the hospital, inviting both families to the engagement. On engagement day, Alice didn't show, pretending to be ill, but as Jack was about to give me the ring, she appeared soaking wet outside the window. Jack's hand trembled with the ring, and after Alice gave him a sad smile and left, he mumbled sorry and ran after her. The Whites, Jack's parents, pushed him to go after her. Judy, quick on her feet, held me down, but she didn't need to. With my leg, I wouldn't have caught up anyway. After that, my dad, Bob, gave a whole speech about moving on, but I barely remember it now. From that day, I lost all feelings toward them. I saw Judy tag me in the group chat. "Jack and Alice are going out on Sunday. You can babysit Brain. Remember to be nice." I ignored it and muted the group. Oddly, Alice messaged me, asking me to join them so we could mend our relationship. Her urgency seemed to push Judy into pestering me too. I saw this later in my call logs, guessing she wanted free child care. I definitely didn't agree, but I was puzzled by Alice's tactic. Was she trying to provoke me with Jack? It seemed too obvious, not like her usual style. Who knows? But it's not my problem anymore. 7. In this life, I'm not around, and I wonder if Jack can stay safe like he did before. But this Sunday, I do have to take Lily out, Frank's little sister. After Frank's distant cousin passed away, his mom couldn't bear it, so she gave that family some money and took their second daughter in, making her part of their family. Now, she shares the same last name as Frank. Just now, in the car, Frank told me that Lily did well on her exams. He promised to take her out to play, but he's been busy, so it's been postponed till now. He doesn't have much experience with kids, so he asked for my help. Since Frank has helped me a lot, it's only fair to return the favor. Besides, Frank mentioned that Lily is well behaved, better than dealing with Brain, who's not the easiest kid to like. On Sunday, I got to the amusement park 15 minutes early and saw Frank and a little girl waiting. I quickly apologized. "Sorry, boss. Have you been waiting long?" "No, we just got here," Frank replied warmly. The little girl beside him seemed shy, but took the initiative to greet me. "Hello, sister." "Hi, Lily." I responded with a smile and handed her a gift, a pen I'd bought in advance. "This is for you." Lily didn't take it right away. She looked at Frank and only accepted after he nodded. "Thank you, sister," she said, taking the pen. We walked into the amusement park together. Frank whispered to me, "Jane, there's no need for you to spend your own money. I'll reimburse you." I waved it off. "It's nothing, boss. It was just a little thing." Frank just smiled. After a morning at the park, we were all a bit tired. Frank was planning to take Lily for lunch, and I was lucky enough to tag along for the free work meal. Surprisingly, Frank drove to the Atlantis building, the place where I'd dealt with Jack's injury in a past life. Frank and Lily are genuinely nice. If I said I felt sick, they'd insist on taking me to the hospital, which wouldn't make for a great meal. So I bit the bullet and went along, hoping not to run into those three. But of course what I feared happened. Frank went to park the car, telling me to take Lily to the restaurant on the top floor. As we got to the electronics level, I heard a loud voice. "You're still following us, huh?" I looked and saw a boy, around 13 or 14, arms crossed, looking annoyed. "You're so annoying. Don't follow us around. What a pain." "Jane." Alice and Jack came up with him. "Alice, can we get rid of the tag-along?" Brain whined to Alice. "You shouldn't say that. Jane is still your sister," Alice said softly. "Promise me you'll treat Jane with respect, okay?" I looked at the three of them, thinking of the danger from before. I leaned down and whispered to Lily, "Let's stay away from those three." Lily looked at them and nodded obediently. Alice noticed Lily and asked with a smile, "Jane, who's this child with you?" "It's none of your business," I replied coolly. Alice's smile stiffened. "I just wanted to say hello." Jack was wearing sunglasses, so I couldn't read his expression, but I could imagine his displeased look. Not that I cared. Does Miss Jane always greet strangers? Frank arrived, stepping off the escalator. I didn't know when that rude employee might rush out. Once Frank was by my side, I whispered, "Let's ignore them." Lily tugged on his sleeve. "Brother, I'm hungry." Frank patted her head and smiled. "All right, let's go eat." I breathed a sigh of relief and walked on with them. Brain incredulously yelled, "Tag along. Where are you going?" Frank shot him a cold look that shut him up. On our way to the next escalator, I heard a girl crying. A family was arguing at the electronic dictionary counter. The girl wanted a certain brand, but the salesman pushed her parents to buy a more expensive one, supposedly with better pronunciation. Her parents didn't know better and were swayed by him. I sighed. Despite their pushiness, her parents obviously loved her enough to splurge. Unlike my biological parents, who weren't worth mentioning. And that salesman, he looked like the troublemaker from the past. As I walked on, the girl finally resigned, letting her parents choose. The salesman beamed, having convinced another customer. His phone rang, and suddenly panic washed over him as he rushed out. Just seconds later, I heard a commotion from where he'd gone, followed by Alice's scream, "Jack!" And then a crash. Then a familiar voice screamed out in pain. "Ah, my hand!" By then, I was on the escalator, unable to see what was happening as the people murmured in shock. Someone fell off the escalator. 2 people fell? I recognize that guy. He's a pianist from TV. His hand got crushed by an ad board. Did Jack's hand get fractured this time around instead? The salesman ended up worse, impaled by a falling pipe. That's just gruesome. "Jane, come help, Jack fell." Alice ran over, shouting frantically. A bystander tugged my sleeve. "Are they calling you?" "They've got the wrong person," Frank answered before I could. The bystander let it go as the escalator carried us upward, leaving Alice behind. Frank noticed my frown. "Are you worried about them?" I shook my head. "No, just thinking about it makes me lose my appetite." I glanced at Lily, wondering if such talk was inappropriate in front of a child. 8. Frank seemed to guess what I was thinking and told Lily, "Those people weren't nice to Jane." Lily then told me, "Jane shouldn't be nice to them either." What a sweet and understanding kid. We arrived at the rooftop restaurant. Thanks to Frank, I had a fancy lunch. After the meal as planned, we were supposed to take Lily to see a movie. She was super excited about it and wouldn't stop talking. Thinking about her past, I sighed. It's a good thing she met some good people. Frank softly said, "My mom did it not just because she pitied the child, but probably because she shared similar experiences." "Huh? What?" Frank noticed my surprise and smiled lightly. "My mom has a brother too." "Oh, I see." As soon as we stepped out of the building, Frank got a phone call. His expression changed after a few words. After he hung up, he turned to me. "Sorry, Jane. There's something at the company I need to handle, and I'm gonna need you to take care of a personal matter for me." Even though I felt my job as an assistant was to handle company stuff, maybe it was something beyond my reach. All right, boss, what do you need me to do? My mom was admitted to the hospital this morning, and I need you to check on her for me. I nodded without asking more. He gave me the hospital address and room number. I was surprised. It was the same hospital Alice often went to for checkups. Frank wanted me to take Lily home first, but she insisted on going to the hospital when she heard her mom wasn't well. Frank thought it over and asked me to take care of her. I bought some lilies and apples nearby, called a car, and headed straight to the hospital. There I ran into Bob and Jack's dad, North. Bob's face fell the moment he saw me. What are you doing here? North also looked unwelcoming, but didn't say anything. Looks like Jack had been taken here for treatment. Not wanting to engage with them, I planned to find the right room. Bob said in a low voice, "Your sister got so stressed because of you that she's in the hospital. Don't disturb her. Go home and think about what you've done." Is Alice in the hospital too? Considering what Frank mentioned earlier about his mother's heart problems, could she be in the same room as Alice? Lily tugged at my sleeve and pointed to the building ahead. We're supposed to go to building 2, right? I was glad not to have to see Alice, especially since Judy might also be there, who always has something harsh to say. I turned to leave with Lily, but Bob shouted, "Where are you going?" I reluctantly stopped and turned around. "I'm here to see someone else, not Alice or Jack." "You." Bob's face turned red with anger. At that moment, a doctor came over to explain Alice's condition to Bob, and North answered a call from his wife, possibly about Jack's emotional instability. Taking the opportunity, I quickly left with Lily. On the way, Lily asked, "Who were those 2 guys? They seem so mean." I replied, "The one who yelled is my biological father, and the one with the sour face is my ex, the dad of the guy with sunglasses you saw earlier." I was worrying I'd made it too complicated, but Lily just said, "I think your ex-boyfriend isn't as nice as my big brother." I was surprised. Lily looked 2 or 3 years younger than Brian, but sure knew a lot. Quick to clarify, I said, "Your brother and I just have a work relationship. But Jane, you still go out with him on your days off. That's to accompany you." As we chatted, we reached the room we were looking for. I was surprised to find out that Frank's mom was in a VIP room. 2 sharp-dressed men were standing by the door, probably bodyguards. Feeling a bit intimidated, I walked up carefully. The bodyguards greeted us, "Hello, Miss Jane. Are you Miss Jane? The young master mentioned you'd come." "Miss, young master." I was confused, but the bodyguard opened the door. I walked in a little dazed. The VIP room was spacious and luxurious. On the bed lay a very graceful middle-aged woman. That must be Frank's mom. Trying to figure out how to address her, I suddenly realized she looked familiar. Wasn't she the legendary businesswoman Ms. Jane? After a divorce due to infidelity, she single-handedly founded the Alden while raising a child. Now the business ranks in the top 10 nationwide. So Frank is the prince of the Alden? Then why did he start his own venture? There were a few others in the room, probably her personal assistants. I handed the things I brought to one of them. She smiled warmly and greeted me, "You're Jane, right? Thanks for the trouble, come have a seat." She asked someone to bring over 2 chairs for us. Lily and I sat down. "President." Jane smiled like Frank said, "No need to be formal, just call me Wendy." Not wanting to argue with a patient, I agreed, saying, "Ms. Wendy." Jane looked delighted. "Thanks for taking care of Lily today." I quickly waved my hands. No, it was more like a treat for me, getting to eat and play. Lily seemed tense. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Jane gently patted Lily's head. "I'm fine." She then held my hand. "I'm here in the hospital, and this is our first meeting, so I couldn't prepare something nice for you. Hope you don't mind." "Oh no, you really don't have to," she interrupted with a bright smile. "No, I insist. Once everything settles, I'll treat you to a meal. You know, we have a bit of a connection, you and I." "A connection?" I was too startled to find my words. "Auntie, I'm just your son's employee. You don't have to treat me like this." "And what kind of connection do we have?" After chatting a bit more, noticing Jane looked somewhat weary, I quickly said, "Ms. Wendy, do you need to rest a bit?" 9. Jane noticed I was worried and smiled. "I'm really fine, just a bit tired. And I had some things happen today." As she said the last part, Her smile faded a little. Just then, a phone rang in the hospital room. An assistant came over with the phone. "President, Mr. Frank is calling." Ms. Wendy took the call, said a couple of words, hung up, and then smiled. "Frank will be here soon. He'll take you back." After sitting for a bit longer, I saw Ms. Wendy was really exhausted. I figured Frank would be here soon, so I took Lily and said goodbye. The moment we stepped out of building 2, I heard a familiar and annoying voice. "Aunt, there she is. Jack got hurt today, and Alice felt awful. But she just left with some random guy." I looked up and saw Mrs. Judy standing there, her face twisted with anger, glaring at me like she was ready to explode. Mrs. Judy stormed towards me and went to hit me. Immediately I caught her hand. "Jane, you've got some nerve. I'm your mother. Am I not allowed to hit you? The law doesn't say parents can hit their kids. Have you no conscience? Your sister is still in a hospital bed. Jack's been so good to our family, and here you are leaving with some random guy." Lily, who'd been silent, finally spoke up. "My brother isn't some random guy. He's way better than whoever you support." Mrs. Judy shot Lily a disdainful glance. "Are you that desperate for a man? Wanting to help take care of other people's kids too?" Even though I knew Mrs. Judy's character, her words made me see red. Dizziness washed over me as anger built up in my chest. Lily rushed forward. "You're mean. You can't talk to Jane like that." Brian stepped up too, mimicking Mrs. Judy's scorn. "You're the bad one. Your brother's a random guy, and you're just a bastard." A loud smack echoed, and a handprint marked Brian's face. Mrs. Judy and Brian stood there stunned. I spoke coldly. "Remember, watch your mouth from now on." Brian, clutching his face, started crying in disbelief. "You hit me. I'm telling my dad." "Aunt hit her." Mrs. Judy tried to hit me again, but someone held her back from behind me. I turned around. It was Wendy's bodyguard. "The president asked me to escort Miss Jane." The bodyguard's grip was far stronger than mine. Mrs. Judy struggled, but she couldn't break free. Brian was also intimidated by the large bodyguard, his legs visibly shaking in fear. Not getting her way, Mrs. Judy began to scream insults. "You ungrateful girl, siding with outsiders against your own family. Ungrateful girl?" I chuckled softly. "I wish you'd never given birth to me. You." Both of them were furious, but didn't dare to touch me physically. I ignored them and turned to leave. "Jane, stop. It's your duty to support one another. Alice is in the hospital. Go take care of her." I almost laughed. Her husband wanted me gone, and here she was insisting I stay to help. "No, I'm busy. You have to, or I'll go around your office spreading rumors about your character." I swung around, glaring at her. She must have thought she finally had leverage over me. There was triumph in her eyes. I silently repeated that hitting people is illegal, taking 2 deep breaths. "Go ahead." That's what I wanted to say, but a man's voice spoke them aloud. I knew my assistant wouldn't trust baseless accusations easily, and if Director Judy really caused trouble at my office, I'd call the police. Mrs. Judy was taken aback, stammering, "Vice President Frank. Jane works at the Alden?" I was surprised too. Frank's startup wasn't called the Alden, but hearing her call him vice president, it seemed he had a role there too. No wonder he wasn't around the office much. It looked like Mrs. Judy's company was partnering with the Alden, and they were the ones in need. Jane works for the company I started, but that doesn't cloud my judgment. Mrs. Judy's face flushed with embarrassment, but she still tried to act tough. "This was just a family squabble, Vice President Frank. You misunderstood." She and Alice were truly cut from the same cloth, always hiding behind family ties. So threatening to cause chaos at my office is just a family squabble? With behavior like this, I'll reconsider your company's partnership with the Alden. Frank's expression was still hard. Mrs. Judy, despite her years as a big company executive, tried to stay composed. "I was just upset, said some things I didn't mean. What parent would harm their child? It wouldn't be suitable to involve the Alden, would it? Would the president agree with that?" Frank's response was frosty. "Not everyone is fit to be a parent. Plus, my mother left full authority for this partnership with me. I'd suggest your company find someone suitable to handle dealings with us." Mrs. Judy's face went pale, but she persisted. "Apologies, Vice President Frank. I was careless with my words. We usually have a very good relationship, I was just too emotional about her sister this time. As she spoke, she kept sending me pleading looks to back her up. Lies! You just said Jane was desperate for a man. Lily retorted loudly, brother, don't work with her. She called you a random guy. Then Lily pointed at Brian. He called me a bastard. Brian started to lose it too. You are a... Mrs. Judy panicked, quickly covering Brian's mouth. Vice President Frank, kids say things they don't mean, just ignore. Frank let out a cold laugh, turning to me. I'll take you guys home now. 10. Mrs. Judy didn't dare to stop us, so she just watched as we took off. Even far away, I could still hear Brain shouting behind me. Aunt, why didn't you stop them? Sitting in Frank's car, I sensed something off about his mood. After thinking for a bit, I could only figure that the brat Brain might have said something rude and pissed him off. In the back seat, Lily yawned, and Frank asked if we could drop her off at home to rest first. I quickly said, you take Lily home. I can get back on my own. No, I need to talk to you about something, he replied. I looked at him puzzled. You need to be careful with your sister. Her heart condition might be getting worse, he said. He didn't elaborate, but it made me suddenly remember about what happened in the past. Back then, I was forced to accept Jack and Alice being together. Didn't want to get involved anymore. But when Alice expressed that she hoped for Jane's blessing, Mr. and Mrs. Green forced me to help with their engagement. I couldn't take it and finally snapped. Ran outside after a big argument with them. Alice chased after me, demanding I apologize to the Green couple. In the scuffle, she pushed me onto the street, and I got hit by a car. She had a heart attack right then, collapsing on the ground. As I was dying, I overheard my parents saying they'd transplant my heart to her. I hadn't wanted to think about the past in this new life, just wanted to stay away from those weirdos. But hearing Frank say that, I became instantly alert. Was my car accident in my past life really just an accident? Frank then mentioned he'd focus on the Alden next, leaving the startup to me. I've barely been Frank's assistant for long, and now he wants me to run his startup? I looked at his heavy expression full of doubt. What's going on? I stared at my computer, my mind on what Frank had told me earlier. It turned out that his father, who had abandoned him, was nearing bankruptcy. Together with Frank's uncle, they wanted to seize Wendy's hard-earned legacy. I met him at the company, and he told me not to blame him, saying he needed to leave some assets for his son from the second marriage. He said since I had my own business, the Alden should be handed to them to reach its full potential, because I wouldn't have time for it with Mom's health and all. I can't quite describe Frank's expression when he recounted those words, but I saw his hand gripping the steering wheel tight. Recalling his dad's nonsense still makes me angry. How can a father be so biased? Biased? I think I understand Frank's attitude towards me now. I refreshed the page and saw a trending topic. Famous pianist Jack has suffered a shattered right hand. Clicking in, it was a video from today's incident at the mall. News sure spreads fast in the internet age. With Jack being a big name, the day's event had exploded in popularity. Around 8 p.m., a reliable news account posted an update saying they'd contacted Jack's studio. All they'd confirm was that Jack was injured. They needed to check with family to see if his hand was affected, and had no further comment. An hour later, Jack's studio put out a statement saying that due to unforeseen circumstances, the upcoming tour had to be canceled. Everyone knew this meant Jack wouldn't be playing piano anymore. A few die-hard fans were still comforting themselves, hoping the injury was to his waist or leg. The Green couple didn't stop bothering me, and people in the chat group accused me of being ungrateful. Jack's dad, Fong Ming, was even nastier, threatening me. The White family joined in for no apparent reason, and while they weren't as harsh, they did also criticize me for being cold-hearted and holding a grudge. Luckily, I had notifications muted and only checked for a laugh. Compared to those people, work was more important. To help me adapt fast to my new role, Frank invited his college buddy Felix. Felix had just left his last job and accepted the invitation to assist me. The next day, after Frank went over our tasks in the meeting room, Felix shook my hand with a smile and said, "Looking forward to working with you, Chief Jane." I nearly spat out my tea. "You're too kind." Frank coughed lightly. "You can call him Assistant Felix." Felix exclaimed dramatically, We were best friends back in college. And now I'm Assistant Felix? Turning to me, he teased. Were you drawn to this startup because of Frank's looks? I started coughing hard. Frank got serious. Assistant Jane is quite capable, Felix. Don't scare her away. I quickly clarified, not at all. I just thought startups might have less office politics. Felix glanced at Frank and me, a knowing smile on his face. When he heard about Wendy being in the hospital, he offered to visit too. So the three of us headed there that day. In the VIP ward, we saw Wendy looking much better. With a smile, she reassured us that the doctor expected she'd be discharged in a couple of days. After chatting for a while, Wendy wanted to discuss the Alden with Frank. Neither Felix nor I worked for the Alden, so we excused ourselves. Outside the ward, I spotted the green couple not too far away. They looked exhausted and worried. When they saw me, perhaps because Frank was absent, Mrs. Judy's attitude stiffened. Your sister is still in the hospital, and you're ignoring her. Do you have any conscience? Bob sighed deeply, unable to hide his fatigue. The doctor said your sister's heart condition might be worsening. We're tired, be considerate. I was shocked. So it was true. In my last life, Alice pretended to be weak in front of Jack to delay my rescue. She stayed in the hospital for almost 2 weeks, but doctors couldn't find any issues with her heart. Thinking for a second, I turned to Felix and said, Mr. Felix, could you wait for me at a store? 11. Felix glanced at them, nodded, said okay, and left. Once Felix was gone, I whipped out my phone, hit record, and sarcastically said, you should be more concerned about your daughter being sick. I don't see why you're coming to me, a stranger. Judy was about to lose it, but Bob held her back. Jane, we both have jobs, Bob said through gritted teeth. We hope you can take care of Alice. You should just hire a nurse. I have work too. Judy snapped, a nurse costs money. Quit your job. Bob chimed in. Look, I promise we'll find you an easier job once your sister's better. That way, you won't be too drained. His comment took me back. After I graduated, there was an opportunity at a company Bob knew, meant for me to try. But Alice needed a job change, so Bob gave her the chance instead. I've got mortgage payments, I said. And that easy job won't cut it for me. Then sell your house. I told you not to buy it in the first place. You have a room here. Bob halted Judy's rant again and added, there's another thing. The doctor said follow-up treatments may cost hundreds of thousands. We're short on cash, so can you? I cut him off, asked Jack. And by the way, Judy, you've got it wrong. There's no room for me. Those two are Alice's bedroom and study. I'm not moving into a storage room. Bob's face tightened. Jack's in no position to help. Can't we work something out about the rooms? Help us get through this, will you? I chuckled. Need a reminder? You've got about $1 million in liquid assets. As long as you're not buying property, you can handle compensation for that car crash and Alice's treatments. If push comes to shove, sell some shares or property. Those are for Alice. We can't sell them. Bob raised his voice. Alice is seriously ill. Don't you care at all? I just sneered. What do you want for me to give her my heart? I'm not dead yet. Both of them erupted you. I pulled Jane's family register from my bag and handed it over. Since I heard about Alice's worsening condition from Frank, I figured I'd run into the Greens at the hospital today, so I'd prepared. They were stunned. How did you get this? Judy snapped out of it quickly, flipping to my page. She was furious. I should never have had you. Gazing at their reactions, I voiced a question that lingered for ages. Why did you have me in the first place? They adored Alice. Shouldn't they have focused all their attention on her? Why have another child? And after having me, they were distant, only providing the basics for food, clothes, and schooling. When injuries occurred, they'd freak out and scold me. In my past life, a tiny part of me held hope they cared for me, maybe not as much as Alice, but still. Looking back, were they planning on having a second child? Or was I just meant for Alice's benefit? Bob erupted in anger. At a time like this, you're picking fights? When will you grow up? Judy was losing it, screaming, why have you? You're meant for Alice. Everything about you is. Judy, Bob barked. Judy snapped back to her senses, cutting the sentence short. I sighed. Of course it was like that. Maybe they didn't plan for me to be a donor from the start. But in a critical moment, I'd be expendable. Not happening, I said softly. Don't even think about it. Jane, you've got it wrong. I've got things to do, I stated. I'd appreciate it if you didn't bother me anymore. Judy was shaking. Fine. If that's how it is, we're cutting ties. We don't recognize you as our daughter anymore. Pleased, I stopped recording. That sounds great. Following Felix's message, I went to the place he mentioned. Right after stepping in, I saw him arguing with a girl. Actually, it was mostly her angrily confronting him. Felix finally and coldly said, I can't help you. You need to leave. The girl stormed off, frustrated. Afterward, Felix spotted me and waved. As I approached, I fumbled for words and blurted, ex-girlfriend? Instantly regretting it, I realized I was probing into private affairs. Felix laughed, yeah. Although not mine. It involves someone else. Definitely not my business. Felix, however, chuckled. The person in question just arrived. If you're curious, ask him. Turning, it was Frank. He shot Felix a look. Felix shrugged innocently. I messaged you saying she was here. Turns out, that's Frank's ex-girlfriend. To avoid it, I changed the subject. Boss done talking with the CEO? Frank sat down. Yeah, let's eat here. Felix stood. I've got stuff to do. Enjoy your meal. See you Monday. Before we could react, he darted off. So it was just me and Frank again. But it wasn't as awkward as before. Felix's comment about the girl being Frank's ex piqued curiosity over their past. Curious? I noticed Frank's smile. Guess my curiosity was obvious. I shook my head, no, not at all. Frank took a sip of his drink. Not much really. She didn't understand my decision to start fresh. She thought it was risky, so she ended up with my half-brother. He continued. What she didn't know was my startup was planned by my mom. It would eventually merge back into the Alden. I see. Lately, my biological father's facing bankruptcy. And his son, well, isn't doing much better. 12. So she's trying to patch things up with you? Everyone has their goals. I don't blame her. But people change, and going back to the way things were? That's just not happening. So, did she want Mr. Felix's assistant to mediate between you two? Frank nodded. She came by the Alden before, and might come to our company next. You and Felix might have to deal with her then. I get it. Frank wasn't trying to badmouth his ex. He was giving me a task beyond work. I sighed, feeling a bit sorry for both of us. What's up? Nothing much, just thinking our situations are kinda similar. Then I snapped back to reality and clammed up. I felt so awkward. Why on earth was I talking to my boss about this? But then an idea struck me. I looked him in the eye and asked softly, Is that why you're so keen on being friends with me? Frank nodded slightly, smiling kindly. After hearing your story, I thought of my mom, Lily, and myself. He mentioned Wendy, and suddenly I remembered how she said we were connected. But how? I voiced my confusion. He laughed. At first, I noticed you because I saw you arguing with your family outside the garden community. It caught my attention. Then you realized I'm also someone who didn't get love from my parents. Never thought an experience like that would land me such a valuable connection. I suddenly saw things in a new light, grinned, and said, Boss, you mentioned before I could call you by your name outside work hours. Still valid? Frank chuckled, Of course it's valid. I laughed. This period will be tough. So remember to give me a raise and promotion, Frank. Over these 2 weeks, the Green couple hasn't bothered me. They're probably overwhelmed with the car accident claim and Alice's treatment. There are still rumors online about Jack's injury, but they're fading away. Wendy's doing well. The day Frank picked Wendy up from the hospital, he called me to his office at work. I thought it was company business, but turns out it was about Alice. Apparently, Alice's situation is really bad. After a round of consultations, the doctors weren't hopeful. One doctor mentioned that maybe a renowned foreign heart specialist could help, but he lives abroad and is not easy to contact. Even though the Greens have some social standing, meeting such an expert is tough. However, Wendy is an old friend of this specialist. The Greens, desperate, saw Frank picking up Wendy and asked him for help. I was stunned. How did they find out about this? Frank smiled. The doctor did an interview before, mentioning some of his connections in past. They probably found out by doing some research. I felt embarrassed. Sorry, Frank, for bothering you and Wendy. No problem, he said. I wanted to ask your opinion about it. If you want to help them, I can reach out to the doctor. I knew Frank thought I might feel soft-hearted. He saw me hesitating and said, "Don't feel like you're burdening me with a favor here." I shook my head. "I consider you a friend. If I needed help, I wouldn't hesitate to ask." I added with a smile, "I just don't want to owe a friend a favor for their sake." Frank smiled too. "Good that you have a clear mind about it. But they'll probably try reaching out again." I grinned. "Yeah, I figured as much." Sure enough, within 3 days they contacted me. I've recently started as the acting general manager, busy with company tasks, barely checking my personal phone. When I finally did, a bunch of messages flooded in, all blaming and criticizing me. "Jane, I'm begging you, please ask your boss. You wouldn't just watch as your family is in danger, right? Let's not dwell on you hitting brain. Who's right or wrong, we'll deal with later. The urgent matter is your sister's condition. You don't want your parents to bury a child, right? What are you telling her? She's so stubborn. Jane, if anything happens to Alice, your dad and I will donate everything. Don't think you'll get a penny. Jane, I've watched you grow up. I'm practically family. Just listen to me once, okay? I don't blame you for Jack's hand. It's already like that. But at least your sister still stands a chance." I was surprised the Whites were so invested in Alice despite Jack's injury. Is it because Jack's hand was beyond saving? From online rumors, it seems they're thinking about suing that store clerk. I looked up that heart specialist and learned their hospital is also renowned for orthopedics. Makes sense. They're still clinging to hope for their son's future. That's the classic parental love. Mrs. White's words made me laugh. I finally replied to her. "Mrs. White, what are you referring to exactly?" The group chat exploded again, with scolding and persuading alike. "Jane, by calling me that, are you ignoring our past? Don't you remember the gifts I brought for you and Alice? The times I took you out? I only remember you taking Alice out, bringing her gifts. I'm not holding grudges. You can take whoever you want and give whatever you wish, but don't act like you did me any favors." I went on to reply to the others. "The specialist isn't retired yet. Asking them to come from abroad would take a lot of favors and money. I can't just go to my boss with an empty-handed request. How much? Would $1 million be enough? Stop yelling. Honestly, I can't help with this." After sending this, I was surprised that Bob and Judy suddenly stopped pestering. 13. My friend sent me a DM. "Jack wants to see you. He said at least this time it wasn't your leg that got hurt." I frowned. Did he get reincarnated too? Or is he just seeing everything like a god? To find out, I agreed to visit the hospital. When I saw Jack again, he was in bed. He'd recovered from the bruises and the slight fracture after falling off the escalator. But that important hand of his was still wrapped up tightly. He looked haggard, not the vibrant young talent he once was. He didn't bother with small talk, just got straight to the point. "I had a dream." As soon as he spoke, I knew it. He's got the god's perspective. What he described about his dream matched my past life. He finally said, "After I woke up, your attitude made sense. You knew something was going to happen at the mall, didn't you?" I shrugged. "So what? Do you feel better now seeing me like this?" Jack laughed feebly. "If my dream was real, I owe you an apology for the past life. But Alice is your sister, and she didn't mean it then either." He pleaded, "Your parents didn't let you die on purpose. They just had no hope and Alice couldn't wait. So please save Alice." Turns out he wanted to meet me just to try saving his love. I was surprisingly calm, even admiring his devotion to Alice. If it were anyone else, I might have agreed. "Are you done?" "I'm leaving." "Jane, you're really this heartless." "Jack, you know how much effort it would take to pull strings for this. If it were just a matter of speaking up, I'd do it to stop Alice's parents from bothering me. But it's not, and I'm not willing to waste another bit of energy on you. Don't blame me, Jane." Ignoring that last bit, I opened the door and left. As I exited, I brushed past a hat-wearing figure. The brim was low, hiding their face, but something about them felt familiar. Looked female. Alice was still in bed, so it couldn't be her. Did Jack find another woman? Why did she seem familiar? I shook my head, dismissing the thought. After a bit, I saw the green and white couples at the third-floor service desk. I walked past them toward the elevator. Judy's cold voice followed. "Jane, this is your last chance. Will you go to Mr. Frank? Not like you're donating a heart. I hit the elevator button. Then don't say I didn't care for mother-daughter love. Same line as Jack. So annoying. At the hospital exit, I saw Frank's car. Get in, Frank said, looking serious. He seemed upset. Why was he here? Before I came to the hospital, I'd told Felix to call the cops if he didn't hear from me. I got into the car confused. Thankfully, it didn't take long for him to explain. You told Felix, but not me. He sounded helpless. I felt a bit helpless too. Weren't Felix and I planning on working overtime today? You're at the Alden. Didn't want to bother you. Should I move him to the Alden and stay here myself? I was a bit dumbfounded, not sure what he meant. We were silent for a while. When we got to the office, as I was about to get out, Frank said, I've got time. Let's take a look inside. So I waited till he parked and went through the Stardust door with him. Right when we entered, there was a commotion. Felix, we were college friends. Can't believe you're being like this. Frank's single. Isn't he waiting for me? Sounded like a woman arguing with Felix. As I approached, I recognized Tina from before. I glanced at Frank, noticing his frown. Tina, can't you see it? I'm only being honest because we're old friends. You don't stand a chance with Frank anymore. They noticed us when he finished speaking. Thankfully it was a day off, so there weren't many people around. Just one confused receptionist watching. Frank. Tina's eyes welled up when she saw him. I tried to quietly step aside, not wanting to intrude, but Frank pulled me closer. I was about to protest when he mouthed the words, help me. Let me introduce you, this is my girlfriend Jane. Don't drag me into your drama. Felix just narrowed his eyes with a smirk. I was speechless. Tina was tearful. You're still mad and using her to get back at me, aren't you? Frank coolly replied. You know I don't play games like that. Yeah right, aren't you playing one now? Tina ran out crying. I pulled away, not happy with Frank. Frank apologized sincerely. Sorry, once things settle, I'll see you get a promotion and raise. Wow, money, but that's not the point. Frank left after hanging around a bit. I made an excuse about work to avoid seeing him off. When Felix returned, I wasn't thrilled. Felix, I told you to come. Why did Frank show up? He shrugged, helping a brother out. I was speechless. What was he talking about? Felix smiled mischievously. I think Jane, you're a better match than Tina. I ended up chasing him out with a folder, so he'd get back to work. 14. I feel like things aren't going well, but no one on the other side has explicitly said anything. I don't want to bring it up without a good reason. It would be embarrassing if I misinterpreted. Before I could figure out what to do, Frank's relatives started stirring up trouble. They spread rumors that the Alden and the company were illegal, Wendy cheated back in the day, and Frank was neglecting family and ignoring his father's bankruptcy. I knew they were trying to undermine Wendy and her son's authority at the Alden. The attention on the Alden hadn't faded yet, so they set their sights on our company, Star Bright, using the same tactics. To keep Frank from worrying, Felix and I worked tirelessly to stabilize the situation, barely catching a breath. But just as we did, they launched a new wave of attacks. Frank's half-brother, Robin, posted a long message accusing Frank of abandoning his girlfriend for a new one. Supposedly, the girlfriend got wooed by Robin, and Frank gifted Star Bright to me, allowing me to run it into bankruptcy. Robin also claimed it was only because his father, Enzo, generously split his assets with his ex-wife that she could succeed in her business. Jane found these ridiculous statements laughable, especially given Robin's account name, which translates to something meaningful. What a shame. Comically, it seems Enzo's side didn't get their story straight with the Alden folks. Soon after Robin's post, the Alden released a message of their own. Wendy's brother, Gene Erlian, publicly claimed his sister got nothing in the divorce and relied on him to fund her startup. Now that the Alden is flourishing, his nephew wants to kick him out, and he can't accept that. Robin and Gene Erlian's conflicting claims made some sensible internet users realize they should wait for more facts. I called Frank to check in, and he said he's ready to fight back. Enzo's side still thinks their tactics are effective, though Tina probably believes this too. Despite Frank rejecting her recently, she showed up at Star Bright again within days. I met Tina at the front desk where she was stopped. She looked at me with thinly veiled scorn and said, Frank's taste is getting worse. I'll give you $1 million to leave him. I nodded, sure, transfer it now. Tina was stunned. She didn't expect me to agree so quickly. She stammered, once you really leave him. I cut her off. Oh, so you don't actually have $1 million? You really thought you could play me? My annual salary is almost that. Truthfully, I was bluffing. Frank hadn't discussed my new salary with me yet. Oh right, I forgot to ask him about that. Tina stormed off in anger. A few days later, Frank started fighting back. He first released proof that the Alden and Starbright are operating legally. Wendy disclosed evidence of Enzo's affair and their divorce agreement, stating she only agreed to split the assets to quickly move on and start a new life with Frank, as Enzo was dragging out the divorce. Back then, the Aldens showed favoritism towards males, with most of the assets going to her brother, Sheen Erlian, and only a bit of cash to her. There was no financial support from her brother for her startup. Once the Alden and Starbright were proven to be in the clear, rumors about Enzo and his son surfaced. Following his remarriage, Enzo's affairs continued, though his current wife is more formidable, preventing any more illegitimate children. The company was filled with his wife's relatives who mismanaged it into near bankruptcy. Robin was irresponsible, harassing female colleagues despite having a girlfriend. Online, he maliciously interpreted women's usernames and wrote inappropriate stories about others. Internet sleuths dug deeper to find Tina left Frank for someone richer. They hadn't contacted each other for years, and I, portrayed as the new affair, only joined the company a couple of years ago. I wasn't a third party at all. Soon, officials released statements alleging Enzo and his son were guilty of tax fraud and had links to organized crime. They were quickly arrested, along with the third person involved in the affair. Frank's uncle was in deep with gambling debts and sold his house to flee with his family to another state. Tina gained notoriety from all this and settled down, but whether she's truly moved on, I'm unsure. Everything worked out, but I still felt uneasy. Sure enough, a month later I got a call. Hello, Miss Jane, this is the production team of Family Affairs. I was in a meeting with Frank and Felix when they called. I didn't expect them to go straight to a TV show, but it's clever. Going public through TV and the internet ensures another wave of attention. They waited for the heat from Enzo's drama to die down before making their move, probably learning from their quick downfall. I turned on the TV in the meeting room to watch their segment. They all gathered in Alice's hospital room. On screen, Alice appeared in fair condition. Bob and Judy had managed to get specialists for her thanks to connections. The show producers probably knew I'd refused to go on camera, so they called me from her room instead, hoping to catch me off guard. The host asked bluntly, while your sister lies on her sickbed, are you really ignoring your family over your parents' favoritism? Isn't it justifiable given your sister's frail health since childhood? The host's questioning was sharp, and discussions online about this incident began to grow. 15. The conversation started to steer towards criticizing me, especially since Judy was twisting the truth. This only fueled more harsh comments from netizens. TSK, such an ungrateful person. Her family needed money badly, and all she thought about was buying a house for herself. She wasn't even happy to give her sister a study room. She could use it too, couldn't she? And she broke ties with her family over a man. Sure, it's a bit off that the guy liked the sister after dating her, but seeing her behavior, I kinda understand him. Folks, the parents did say that guy liked the sister first. It was just her clinging on to him. See, having kids is a gamble. You might just end up with an ungrateful brat like this. I looked at these comments and frowned. In the past, they might have pissed me off, but now they just bothered me. Need me to help? Frank chuckled, though I felt he knew I wouldn't just sit around and do nothing, and that I'd already made some plans. Yeah, I actually could use some help. I sent Frank the neatly organized materials. They included recordings and screenshots I spent quite some time creating a detailed report from. I am practical enough to use every resource available to solve this problem. Felix sneered at the Green family and Alice's actions, eager to step in. So Frank contacted the Alden's PR department, and Felix started digging into the source of the online trolls. Miss Jane? After some time passed, the person on the other end of the line began urging. I put the phone back to my ear. Yeah, I'm here. Are you reflecting on yourself? Remember, even animals like sheep and crows show gratitude. If you forget your parents' kindness over trivial matters and don't honor them, aren't you worse than an animal? The host's expression became more and more pointed. In the hospital room, Alice anxiously reached out and shook her head at the host. The host continued, look at your sister. Even now, she wants to speak highly of you. She instructed the camera to focus on Alice. Alice looked earnest and urgent in front of the camera. Jane, I didn't support going on this show. I know you have issues with us because of Jack, but I don't care about myself. Mom and Dad both miss you. Please just apologize to them. We children should endure a little grievance in front of our parents, shouldn't we? The host then said, Miss Jane, don't blame me for being blunt. After watching all this, I feel like your sister is way better than you. She cares so much about you. And you won't even ask around for people about her condition? This is about her serious illness. Judy then jumped in. I know Mom neglected you in the past, but as long as you come back, there will always be a room for you at home. I waited 3 seconds and seeing no one else talking, I said, finished? Everyone on the screen looked shocked. The host seemed to have a there's no hope for this person look on her face. I continued, everyone check out X later, there's video evidence. The host quickly asked, what's that? Why not just give it to us directly? I sneered, because you're just clout-chasing hypocrites. You didn't investigate, and just condemned me based on one side's story. So I don't want to let you ride the wave. I ended the call immediately, looked up to see Frank grinning at me and Felix giving me a thumbs up. We kept watching TV. Alice was clearly rattled by my mention of X before hanging up. She looked quite pale. The show used an excuse to leave the room. Bob and Judy stayed behind, but then Brain and his dad suddenly showed up. In the room, they didn't say a word, but now they trailed us outside. The show, hungry for more gossip, gladly stretched out their microphones again. Brain, who had been giving me the stink eye earlier, was now playing the model student role. He and his dad insisted the Green family and Alice were good to me, claiming I was just petty and selfish. They even brought up how I slapped Brain once, saying it was his innocence and my intolerance. I thought it was just Jane's and Brain's families losing their minds, but didn't expect Jack and his supposedly sensible parents to chip in too. Someone pointed out that Alice looked like the woman at the scene when Jack got injured and had a heart attack. Another noted Alice mentioned Jack's name earlier. People began speculating they knew each other. They tied it to Jack's earlier statement about confessing to his crush after the tour, guessing it was Alice. Here's the kicker, Jack's personal account liked this guess. This sent his fans and the audience into a frenzy. He then posted on X, vaguely saying his hand might never play again, and he would focus on composing. Since his injury, his studio had only posted a vague message, and he hadn't spoken publicly himself. His sudden statement caused a flurry of reposts and comments. When asked about me, he responded that he appreciated my good intentions and hoped I'd find someone more suited for me. That phrasing implied it was me clinging to him. And the White family also jumped to support their son. They directly called the show saying they wanted to clarify some things, which delighted the program. They subtly hinted at my allegedly bad temper, insisting I never truly dated their son. But for the sake of their reputation, they kept it somewhat civil, just advising me to rethink my actions and hurry up in seeking help for Alice. They left unsaid that it'd be ideal to find an orthopedic expert at the same hospital for their son's hand. Seeing all this, I knew the online comments were probably terrible, but I was still a bit curious. Just as I was scrolling on my phone, a hand covered the screen. Don't look, Frank said in a low voice. Give me the remaining evidence. How do you know I have more evidence? 16. So here's what happened. I sent over all the other evidence I had prepped, including the backstory on why I slapped Brain that day, plus all the chat logs from when I dated Jack and stuff like that. Normally, I would have deleted the chat logs by now with the way I am, but before I was reborn, I was totally head over heels into Jack and never deleted them. Afterward, I just forgot. I wasn't planning to send over all this personal stuff, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared. The other side was just relentless, leaving me no choice but to defend myself. But isn't it pretty harsh of them to ask for your help and then act like this? Felix was really puzzled by how they were treating me. I can kinda see where they're coming from. They probably still think I'm just throwing a tantrum. They figure that if they show their disappointment and disapproval, I'll go back to putting up with everything like before. Before Frank put his phone away, I caught a glimpse of a couple of comments. Stuff like, if they don't fire that woman, we'll boycott Starlight products, and Frank should fire Jane and get an expert for Alice to salvage their reputation. They must think they've backed me into a corner, that I'll have no choice but to beg them for help out of pride or stubbornness. Yeah, right, in their dreams. After Frank had the PR team set up the next press release, he joined Felix and me for lunch. By the time we got back, the whole vibe online had flipped. The Alden's PR team hooked up with an influencer, known for having solid evidence every time. And they cleverly started dropping the bombshells from 1 p.m., releasing a bit every hour. When they first dropped the audio recording, people were blown away by the real reason I bought the house and needed money. Some even apologized for jumping to conclusions. But there were still folks who thought Alice had done nothing wrong to me, so I was overreacting. But as more details came out, Alice and Jack's image started to crumble. The White family, despite having a decent reputation in their social circles, got dragged down too because of Alice and their clueless son. Brain and his dad, who couldn't resist getting involved, also got roasted by the public. Wow, what kind of parents are these? Some said, it's their call to give everything to the older daughter, but they've got the nerve to use the younger one's savings to fix their mess? From the audio, it sounds like they had the younger daughter just to make the older one a heart donor. Seriously? That's freaky. I hope I'm wrong. Nope, you're right. That's exactly what they meant. Parents like that don't deserve kids. And the sister seems like a real piece of work too. Her and Jack are a perfect match of lowlives. Right? Reading their chat logs, you see they dated. But Jack's throwing shade saying the sister's desperate. I even used to like him, but now I'm over it. Honestly, you gotta separate talent from personality. He's still talented in music, and might do well composing. That brat was annoying too, randomly calling people bastards. I'd slap him too for sure. When I got tired of work, I'd scroll through the comments, and they really perked me up. Of course, there were still dissenting voices. Am I the only one who thinks these recordings and screenshots are a little too convenient? Are they even real? Even if they are, Jane is scary for recording her family and friends. Someone quickly countered that. With a leeching family like that, it's normal to protect yourself. Besides, the recordings are from after New Year this year, so she only recently wised up. Yeah, it seems legit, or else the people on the show would have been screaming by now. Speaking of which, the show's been temporarily cut, lol. My awesome boss threw in some shade too. He tweeted that I once asked him for help with Alice. He disliked those people but still asked around, because it involved life or death. The professor apparently couldn't make room in his schedule for at least 6 months, stating he couldn't leave his current patients, but wished Alice the best from abroad. The professor confirmed this by retweeting it. I felt a bit embarrassed since I'd never, and wouldn't, trouble anyone over Alice. Frank was really hyping me up. Who knows if the green couple has any regrets now? Frank had to go deal with the Alden stuff, so he left. Before clocking out, my secretary informed me that 2 couples were passionately demanding to see me. They're like ghosts that just won't fade away. It's a pity Jack's out of the hospital resting at home, or else the white couple wouldn't have come to stir trouble. I instructed the secretary to call security to throw them out while getting ready to head home as usual. But they weren't giving up. When I stepped out and waited for my ride, they tried to rush me again, making me retreat into the building. Luckily, the building security did their job and kept them outside. Judy was yelling her head off, "You monster! You're gonna let your sister die. If anything happens to Alice, I'll never forgive you." I ignored her and calmly told the whites, who were slightly more restrained but still anxious. Even a miracle worker can't make Jack play the piano again. Just give it up. The crowd was growing, and as people recognized the 4 of them, they started murmuring. Unable to handle the attention, the 4 had no choice but to leave sullenly. Bob gave me a complicated look as they walked away. Just then my ride showed up surprisingly quickly. The driver even waved at me. How odd. But we hadn't driven off long when I got a message. Miss Jane, I've arrived. Where are you? Staring at the driver up front, I immediately sent a distress message to the police. 17. The driver noticed my movements through the rearview mirror and sneered, "Too late." The voice sounded